Hi, I'm Father Jim Forson, and before I share a reflection with you on the gospel, I'd like to invite you once again, if you could, to please subscribe to this channel. You'll see the little button on the very bottom of this page, and it really is a help to all of us who are creating this YouTube channel. If you could, you don't have to buy anything. You won't get bothered with emails and all that kind of stuff. It's just a way in which we can be able to help expand this ministry. So if you could, I'd be very grateful. Thanks. So I welcome you to this celebration of the Feast of the Pentecost. You know, one of the things that we put a lot of value in are the last words that someone speaks in this life. They're the words on their deathbed. Because it reveals to us what is happening inside someone's heart. It kind of reveals their soul to us. I was reading about some of the last words. This one American in the 60s, James Rogers, who was going to be dying by firing squad. And just before his execution, he was asked, "Do you have any final requests?" And he said, "Why, yes. I'd like a bulletproof vest, thank you." When you hear something like that, it kind of, his humor right in the face of death, it reveals something about this guy, that he could still find humor and his own self-assurance. Not too dissimilar in a different way, but similar in that with Henry David Thoreau, the American 18th century poet, when he was on his deathbed, his aunt asked him, "Have you made your peace with God?" And his response was, "I've never quarreled with him." And the aunt said, "Yes, but are you ready for the next world?" And his answer was, "One world at a time, please." Those kinds of responses tell you about his self-assurance, and they kind of reveal to you this is a guy who's at peace in his own skin. And I think of that wonderful baseball player for the New York Yankees, Joe DiMaggio, who for a brief time was married to Marilyn Monroe, but they went through just an ugly divorce. And when he was on his deathbed, even though Marilyn Monroe had been dead for 37 years, and even though they had that ugly divorce, his last words were, "I finally get to see Marilyn again." Now, doesn't that tell you about what's in his heart? Doesn't it tell you about how he still loved her? Well, for the last 6-7 weeks, we have been hearing the last words of Jesus Christ. The last words he spoke before his passion and death. The last words he spoke after his resurrection and before his ascension. We've heard him say things like, "You are my friends if you do as I command you, and I no longer speak of you as slaves, for a slave does not know what his master is about. Instead, I call you friends." Or, "Peace I leave you. Whose sins you forgive are forgiven them." Or, "Love one another as I have loved you." Or, "Do you love me? Feed my lambs, tend my sheep." Over and over, we are hearing the last hope, the last desire of Jesus being given to his disciples. And I guess if you were to take all of those thoughts, all those words, and condensed them, maybe the distilled version would be this: breathe life. Bring life to my people. And when better to hear that message, those last words of Jesus, than on this feast of the Pentecost? You know, the Feast of the Pentecost began as a Jewish celebration. It's a Greek word meaning 50. And 50 days after the Passover, all the Jews would gather together and they would pray for God's Spirit to descend upon the earth and to bring blessings. And for them, it was the blessings of the harvest, that it would be a bountiful harvest, a blessing upon their flocks that they would multiply. Because for a people who lived right on the edge of survival, for a sustenance people, those things were essential for life, essential for them to get through this year. So they prayed for God's Spirit to bring them a bountiful harvest. And on this feast of the Pentecost, 50 days after that Last Supper, we see the disciples likewise gathered together, praying for God's Spirit to descend. And it did, as we read in the scriptures for today, in the forms of tongues of flame that descended upon the apostles. That Holy Spirit of God came upon them, and then they burst out of that locked upper room, and they began speaking God's language, which amazed the people who heard them talk. And they said, we're from different countries. We all speak different languages, yet we all understand these men. And they could be understood because they were speaking the language of God to them. They were breathing God's Holy Spirit upon their world. And that same expectation of the apostles to take those last words of Jesus and to take this Holy Spirit of God and to breathe it out into the world, that's expected of us. We all have received God's Holy Spirit. And we are expected to breathe it out into this world. And on this feast of the Pentecost, we once again pray that those blessings of God come down from heaven upon us all, so that we might be able to give to this world that which Jesus gave to it. We can give God's Holy Spirit to this world. How? How do we breathe life? How do we bring life into this world? Well, I guess I'd begin by looking at this world, asking myself, what does it most need? And what is it that I can bring to it? Well, I imagine we all can, all the divisions that are happening in our world, the terrible political divisions, or religious, or cultural, or racial divisions, and sometimes the arrogance that accompanies those divisions, one people looking down upon the other, feeling superior to the other, and the arrogance that can come with it. I have to ask myself, how can I breathe life into that division? Or, well, I was visiting someone in the parish who is so close to death right now and is struggling mightily to stay alive, and asked me to come and anoint them and pray for them because they don't want to die. How do I breathe life into someone in such a moment of struggle? Or a former secretary of mine, her dad died, and she is just grieving him terribly. How do I breathe life into that family, into her life? I think that's the question. How, with this Holy Spirit of God that I've been given, and being as we all believe that grace is a mediated event, that is to say, God's grace comes to this world through His people. We are the ones who receive God's life and then spread God's life. How will I spread God's life, breathe His Spirit upon division? How will I breathe His Spirit upon dreadful illness? How will I breathe His Spirit into people who are grieving terribly? I think that's the question. And maybe on this Pentecost Sunday, I need to spend a little bit of time with that question. I need to think about it a little bit, about how I'm going to do that. And maybe then my prayer today is, Lord, send forth your Spirit and renew this piece of your earth. And my prayer today is, Lord, teach me how to breathe life into this world that is so much in desperate need of life. Teach me how to live by those last words of Jesus.